So I had anxiety about this chair because I'm short, and it's just not easy to get on these. So we are talking about anxiety, and it is something that we can all experience in different levels, but it's also something that we can experience and misunderstand on a lot of different levels too. So I have two experts in their field. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you, and then we'll dive into some questions.
I'm Shirley Miller. I'm a licensed marriage family therapist. Since moving to North Carolina, I've been working with a great company called Maytone Counseling based in Charlotte, and I do telehealth only, which is great.
Hi, I'm Luann, and I am a board-certified internal medicine doctor. I was very fortunate to get to retire last year, but one of the best things about that is that I get to work with the most amazing people at the Health Reach Clinic now. And you may wonder why an internal medicine doctor is up here and not a psychiatrist. Part of that is because mental health and mental health services in our country are sorely lacking. It's hard to get in to see people. And I was surprised how much of my practice I devoted to treating anxiety and depression. It was literally every single day of my practice.
So first, let's start talking about and giving definitions to these. So Shirley, how would you define anxiety?
It's worry, but it's more than that. We all have worries. We all have anxious moments. Anxiety clinically would be when it starts to interfere with your ability to do your tasks of daily living. Can't sleep. What else?
That's good. Okay. Yeah, that's perfect.
Depression?
Yes. Sorry, I want you to hold the mic up. I was more worried
about
about that. Yes. So would you define depression?
Yes.
Glad you read my mind.
Thanks. So depression is also like anxiety caused by a chemical imbalance in our brains. So you can't do anything about that you have it. Just like you can't do anything about having diabetes or high blood pressure. You know, you can treat those things with conservative measures, but you still have them. So depression is a chemical imbalance in the brain, and it manifests itself in different symptoms. People find that they're sad. People have something called anhedonia. That's a big word that means you don't have pleasure in the things that used to pleasure you. Like if someone asked me, well, what do you like? What did you like to do? Well, I like to play bass. Well, when's the last time you played bass guitar? And I say, I can't remember. Well, that's a sign of depression, that you just don't find happiness in the things that used to make you happy. Just like anxiety, you can have sleep issues. Some people sleep too much with depression. Some people don't sleep enough. You can have problems with eating. Some people eat a lot. Some people don't eat at all. So it manifests itself very differently in different people.
What's the difference?
I held it too close.
I don't know what's wrong with that.
Well,
yes, it's giving me anxiety as well. Adam's mic is on the floor right there, so very good. Thank you, tech team, for being all over this.
maybe I won't break this one. I have to turn it on. Okay. Nope.
It takes a few seconds. I've learned that too.
Well,
Now
I'll be more
talk.
anxious and-
There's a red light. It's just not working, apparently. Here. Not that I know a whole lot more about this, but I doubt it very seriously. Testing 1, 2, 3. Why, hell. Oh, I just cussed in worship. I'm going to have a lot of anxiety about that. Oh, my gosh. I knew that was going to happen someday. Oh, dear. I'm so and I just want to let you know it could have been a lot worse. So I think for Lent, yay, thank you, Wayne, the savior of microphones. For Lent, I will be giving up profanity because it has apparently become quite a habit I have. So, holy cow. All right, so Luann, why don't you talk to us about the difference between anxiety and depression?
I will have to say, after you did that, I'm feeling a lot less anxious.
I bet. And the PAC team, I got it. I don't need us to have a meeting after worship. I got it. No profanity in worship. Okay.
So while anxiety and depression are both caused by chemical imbalances, they manifest themselves differently. Depression is more sadness and feeling hopeless, while anxiety is just marked by worry and nervousness.
Okay. Shirley, talk to us about what it feels like to have anxiety.
Feels is a good word because it affects us physiologically as well as psychologically. So in terms of physiologically, we might have that feeling in the pit of our stomach that, waiting for the shoe to drop kind of thing. We may have shallow breathing, difficulty breathing. We may feel tired all the time for no apparent reason. Slept a lot, but I'm still tired. Psychologically, it's worrying about something that might happen, which is part of the insidiousness of it. It hasn't happened yet, and that's where one of the differences between depression and anxiety. Depression tends to look backward at things that have made us sad, while anxiety tends to look forward and anticipate that we need to protect ourselves, and we tend to just make our life smaller and smaller so that we don't take risks and risk getting hurt.
What's the difference between worry? How do you know if you are just worried about something or if it's anxiety?
If you don't worry, there's probably something wrong with you.
Okay.
We all worry. We worry about things like, will the mic work when I'm on stage? We worry about things like...
If your preacher's going to cuss more in the sermon?
I never worried about that at all.
Well, you should.
I was highly entertained.
No, I'm glad. I'm so glad. See, this is a new member of West as well. So we're glad I cuss, right? Yeah.
Well.
No, but go ahead.
Worry. Let's see. Okay, so we worry about things like, will I pass the test? Anxiety becomes more insidious, and there's several kinds of anxiety.
What does insidious mean?
You can't get rid of it. It
Okay.
feels like you can't get rid of it. There's generalized anxiety where everything feels, I'm anxious about everything that I'm walking into, and social anxiety where I'm afraid that if I talk to somebody, I'm going to say the wrong thing or swear. There's that. There's something I tend to use with a lot of patients is an adjustment disorder. So it's something where they're having a new experience that's causing them anxiety. They may have moved, they may have just had a baby, they may have marital strife, and that adjustment disorder can have an anxiety component or a depression component or both, but it tends to be, it's situational.
Okay. Luann, so you've been my doctor, or were my doctor, for a long time, and so you saw me through different life stages, and one of those stages was when my marriage ended, my father died, we were facing a pandemic, and then went into a pandemic. I had confessed to the leadership of West that I was burnt out and just was wrestling with all that. And you, along with my therapist, which I won't ever go to you now because you're a church member, and that'd be a conflict of interest, and I met Luann before, but I had an amazing therapist at the time that you knew, and so y'all worked together to define that I was depressed and anxious. And that as we go through different life stages, like you said, like having a baby, or there's one that women our age don't like to talk about. Would you talk about that just a little?
The big M.
The big M, that's like this unspoken word.
Yeah, it's like you never knew how good you had it till your hormones go away. And it's something that all women face. And when you go through menopause, your hormones change just dramatically. Your progesterone, estrogen, testosterone, and that can trigger anxiety. Now, it's not usually severe anxiety like people who have, like the things you were talking about, but it is real and it does happen. And I have seen a lot of women and treated a lot of women for anxiety around the menopause time. And sometimes their husbands weren't really on board with the treatment, so I would invite them to come to the next visit. And then the patient and I would tell them what menopause felt like. And hopefully that helped some. But it does definitely rear its head during that time.
So part of our conversation today is to help you, if you have these feelings, it's to help those that you love understand what it's like to go through those things, and or if you encounter someone else in your life, on like a colleague or something, to have more grace. Like I have a son and daughter, and they both at different phases in their lives have faced anxiety. And the first time that as a parent I encountered that with them, I'm like, just suck it up. I mean, I don't understand this. And it wasn't until facing it myself, which, the big M word. So a few weeks ago, Dawn and I had this training, and it was in Charlotte. I was going to have to face someone that I knew did not like me because we didn't hire them. And so, preachers have egos just like everybody else. And so I had made them very angry because West was not going to create a position for them. And they were, of course, the clergy at this session. And I almost didn't go. I was so, when I got the email and saw their name, I wrestle with the M anxiety now. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I can't go. I have to find a different session. And then there are so many ramifications of that decision. And so I was able to say, you know what? You are anxious. You are anxious. And so I want to say thank you for both of you helping us, calling it by what it is and helping us see. Because once I realized, okay, I am anxious about this, but I'm also a big girl. And 10 years ago, this would not have bothered me. I've been like, yeah, you should have, sorry. And but now it truly did cripple me, and I did not want to go. So I had to think through all those things. Luann, would you speak to how do you get anxiety? We talked about the big M, but can you catch it like a cold?
Hopefully not. But so some people are just born with the propensity that you're going to have neurotransmitter issues. And those hormones in your brain just don't quite behave like they're supposed to, and as time goes on, you develop anxiety. Also, people who have had past trauma, that triggers it. There's family history. It does tend to run in families, so those are the kind of things. There are also certain medical problems like thyroid disease and certain heart arrhythmias that can mimic the symptoms of anxiety. So those are kind of the big issues.
Shirley, would you speak to people that are born with the neurological propensity to that? Because I think sometimes we judge people that have anxiety if on the outside we look at their lives and we think they've got it all going on. They have enough money, they live in a nice house, or if they're a child, and children can have anxiety too, and teenagers. So will you speak to that? Maybe children and youth and being born with the tendency to develop anxiety.
Like Luann said, it has to do with the way our brain chemistry works, and that can be genetic. And so, yes, there are children who have the tendency toward anxiety, and we think childhood is just a breeze and fun, and can't we go back there? Speaking from a child who probably had a fair bit of anxiety, no, it wasn't a breeze. And every time I'm reminded of childhood, I tend to think of some difficult times versus the playing on the playground. One of the first questions I ask a new client is, do they have any family members with depression or anxiety? And I explain to them that it can be genetic. And there's also, if you were raised in a household where a parent or a family system was highly anxious, you're probably going to adapt that worldview that they're out to get us and I need to be protected and I need to keep myself small. I think about one time I did it right with my own son. So I'm not telling you all the other times that I didn't.
Right.
But this was a time I think of when I did it right. He was in 6th grade, and that was probably his hardest year in terms of his anxiety and ADD. I picked him up from school, and it was just the two of us in the car, and he was borderline disrespectful. He was very irritable. He was snippy. He wasn't outright nasty. But my first thought as a mama was, well, I've got to correct this. He's not allowed to talk to me this way. And I paused, thankfully, and I pulled the car over and I said, Jeremy, who are you angry with? And he burst into tears and he said, me. I'm angry with me. And it broke my heart, but I realized that in that moment I could have added onto his day of, your behavior is not acceptable with me either, and you're not okay. And like I said, it was one of the times I did something right. But we don't realize with children that they can feel very troubled or very anxious, and it's very real to them, like they think the monster under the bed kind of thing, and we need to walk them through it.
Okay. In my study for this message series about our chimp brains and our emotional reactions, and in studying for last week's message around anxiety, I read that our Gen Z, which are late teenagers and college kids, they are the most anxious generation that studies have shown, and that social media has unfortunately a lot to do that comparison trap, that presence of bullying that doesn't exist or didn't exist when we were growing up. To be bullied, you had to see them. You don't have to see them anymore. People can bully you. So for one, we have a lot of families with young children, and this summer we're going to have a Parents of Rookie Humans seminar during AMPed Camp for you to hear from professionals about helping children deal with anxiety and noticing those things, and helping be supportive and encouraging parents. So I wanted to say that, but I also want to say we need to be more aware and not just blow it off. Like, talk therapy, cognitive therapy is very important. What are some other methods of dealing with anxiety, Shirley? And then Luann, I'd like for you to talk about when does it go to a medical realm, and I want us to talk about the stigma that goes with that. But Shirley, if you would talk about just some treatments around, and how do you help people that have anxiety?
A basic thing, of course, is healthy living. Eating right, getting sleep, getting some sunshine, having a social life, and so on.
So does that stuff really matter?
Yeah, it does. However, when you are really caught in the grips of anxiety, you really can't do it. So that's a basic, yes, that would be helpful. Yoga would be helpful, et cetera, but my gosh, I'm afraid to walk into the yoga class, and I'm afraid to look stupid in the yoga class. And
that's why I've not been.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding. Dawn has asked me 1,000,000 times to come to yoga. And I'm like, yeah. I mean, my worst fear is to be in some kind of leotard thing with church people there and have to move my body in ways it doesn't move. I mean, I'm not ever going to yoga probably unless she comes and does tutorials in my house and I can at least look not stupid. But it's a real thing. So
yeah. What I really like to focus on with clients is what they can do in the moment, because they usually are thinking of, oh, I should this, I should that, I should exercise. Well, yes, so should I. But what can you do in the moment? And there's two things. First of all is breathing, which we all breathe. What's the deal? Well, when we're anxious, we breathe very shallowly and we're tense. Think of a baby or a puppy breathing and you see their belly move. Well, we don't want to do that, right? That looks silly, but that's really where we need to be. We need to be breathing down deep into our lungs. So one of the methods I will teach people is 4-4-8 breathing. And that's inhale slowly for a count of 4 through your nose, hold it for a count of 4, then exhale slowly for a count of 8. And usually, first time out, you can't get to 8. You don't have enough air, and that kind of helps you regulate it the next time. And even 3 or 4 of those calms your heartbeat, it actually moves the brain activity from one hemisphere to the other. So I really like knowing the scientific stuff because I really dread being the Stuart Smalley of therapy.
Right.
Yeah, I'm good enough, and doggone it, people like me. So I like to know that there's a scientific reason behind it. So breathing, and there's nothing especially important about the 4-4-8. You need to exhale longer than you inhale. But one of the reasons I like that is because much of our music is written in 4-4. So you can couple that with some calming music and just breathe in to the rhythm of the music. And if you pour yourself a tea, then you've got a ritual.
And probably shouldn't pour
ritual.
ourselves a glass of wine, right?
No.
Can you talk about that?
That is likely to, actually wine is a depressant, and while it has this initial thing of relaxing, for one thing, it doesn't solve any problems. It makes you avoid your problems. But the other thing besides breathing is what you were talking about just a moment ago, is talking yourself through it, the self-talk. So we all have self-talk going on all the time, and we all have negative self-talk to some degree. Many of us more than others. Probably a person with anxiety has a higher proportion of self-talk. And the key there is to catch yourself thinking the negative thought and then challenge it. And that's what you were talking about just a moment ago. You're worried about this person, you challenge your thinking. So that's exactly what you do. Is this really a true thought? This thing I'm thinking, is it really true? Is it likely to happen? Could I survive it if it happened? What would happen then? Well, how much is it going to matter in 5 years? Those kinds of challenging questions. And then you change the thought, or you reframe, is the psychological word. You catch it, you challenge it, you change it. So you change the thought to, you know, it might be awkward when I see this guy that I didn't hire, this woman I didn't hire, but I will be pleasant and it will be okay, and I made the right hiring decision and it'll be all right. So you calm yourself by changing it with a true thought, because again, I'm not real big on positive affirmations that are fuzzy and without merit. I'm so smart. No, I'm a relatively smart person who does intelligent things most of the time.
Well, how I
I'll get
talked
by.
myself through that, I mean, because I really was getting ready to bail on the commitment, and that would have impacted Dawn. And then it's a mandatory training, so I only had like 3 more that I could go to. And 4 years ago, you have to do this every 4 years. 4 years ago, I waited till the last one, and that was not, so did everyone else. And so I knew that was not the best idea. When I was doing that, I'm like, okay, you've launched a church. I mean, that is a fact. And you know how to empower people to live into their gifts so that they can connect with God. That's how the church launched. You didn't do it by yourself. It's because you believe in people. You didn't hire this person because they were not the right one. And other people, I don't ever make those decisions alone. So the leadership at the time, they were like, no. So suck it up, hold your head up, and just be kind. And, you know, we didn't, you know, form lifelong friendships at that training, but I lived through it. It was unpleasant, but I lived through it. So Shirley's not going to promote herself, and I'm not promoting her practice, but therapy is a real thing. One of the things that Shirley said just now, so 5 years, I do reference my divorce. 5 years prior to the actual divorce, I mean, we faced some really difficult decisions in our marriage, and the compass was leaning towards dissolving the marriage. And it was not my choice at the time. And so I was freaking out. It was a couple of weeks before Easter, and my life as I knew it had crumbled. And so I went to my therapist. It was an emergency. I'm like, okay, our son graduates in a few weeks, and I no longer have my definition. Well, I said, I no longer have a family. And he's like, well, first of all, you have a family. That did not go away. And then he said, okay, what is the worst thing that could happen if your marriage dissolves? I'm like, I can't do it. And he said, what can't you do? And I'm like, so I listed all the things. And I'm like, my world will end if my marriage ends. That was my initial thought. And he said, no, it will not. Let's take all the fears and let's deal with them one by one. And, you know, it was 5 years before it ended, but thank goodness I had that conversation with someone that could help me. And, I have really wise friends in my community, but I needed a specialist. I needed someone that has the tools that therapists have. Therapy is not a sign of weakness, and we have that stigma in our society. Luann, I'd like for you to talk about the stigma with therapy. Talk a little more about what you spoke about at the beginning, about a lot of your job became being that of a therapist.
Yeah, and I do want to tell you one thing that I went to a conference when West was young, the Orange Conference in Atlanta, and a guy spoke about anxiety and depression, and one thing he said has stuck with me. It's okay not to be okay, but it's not okay to stay that way. I've told tons of patients that, and sometimes that does hit home. So they're different, and we did the song "Poor Pitiful Me" because I know that's strange, and you're probably wondering why. But I think a lot of times we can sit around and go "Poor me," but you don't have to, because there's so many ways to treat anxiety and depression. In my practice, I evaluate the person individually and then decide what kind of things do they need. So I've had one panic attack in my life. And it was the same exact panic attack you wrote about, Tom. It was my first triathlon, and I did short ones, not long ones. And I got in the water, and I'm a pretty good swimmer, and I couldn't breathe. And so the kayak man came and just sat with me for a while. Now, what I didn't know, my friends, well, in quotation mark friends, didn't tell me that the water was so shallow I could have just stood up. And, but anyway. But I had one panic attack, so I didn't need to go on medication. So you have to look and you have to say, okay, how is anxiety or depression impacting your individual life? Can you do your daily functions, just like you were saying? Or does it paralyze you? Because it paralyzes lots of people. And then you decide, does somebody have it most every day? Do they need a medication that's taken daily? Do they need a medication that you can just take when needed? Like if your pastor asks you to come speak at church and you don't like to speak in front of people, that'd be a time that you could take one of those pills. So
thank you for sharing.
Welcome. But then there are people who need something every day, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with it. I just cannot emphasize enough. I have high blood pressure. My whole family has high blood pressure. Would I not treat my blood pressure? Anxiety and depression are real diseases that have a huge impact on people, and unless you've really talked with people who have it, because you're lucky enough never to have, you cannot understand how debilitating it can be. A lot of times I would, just like the menopause talk, I would invite my patients to bring their significant other to the appointment so that I could try to explain to them they're not weak. They can't not suck it up. They can't help it. And so the medications work. And so why would we not use them?
That 5 years before, so basically 10 years ago, I couldn't get out of bed. And I had very not good thoughts. And, I live a very public life. And so no one knew, except for like one or two just really close friends, that even this was going on. And like I said, it was like right before Easter. So that's always ideal timing in the life of a clergy person. And I couldn't get out of bed. And had suicidal ideation. And, there's different degrees of that. So it was not like I have a plan, I'm going to execute the plan. But it was far enough that I was scared. And a preacher friend called out of the blue that afternoon. And I always tell him, you were my lifeline that day, because it was dark and scary, and I had given up. And so he's like, you've got to talk to somebody. I'm like, dude, I'm talking to somebody. I see a therapist every week, but I don't want to live anymore. And he's like, okay, this is beyond talk therapy. And he had buried his wife a few years prior, and so he had wrestled with really dark, hard things. And I'm like, look, I'm strong, and I'm so, I've got it all together. You know, like I was able to withstand the death of my mother, my father remarrying within a year and moving away from all my friends, and I turned out okay. Why can't I just be okay right now? And he's like, you know, sometimes it's just too much. And so maybe you talk to your therapist about these dark thoughts. And then I didn't want to go on medicine. You know, like I saw it as a weakness. And like it made me not strong. And I was afraid it was going to change who I am. Like I'd walk out here and you'd be like, what the heck happened to her today? And so Luann, will you speak to that medicine doesn't just magically, number one, make it all go away and better, but will you speak to that a minute?
Yeah. So that's a very good point, because that's what a lot of people think. Like I'm going to become some Pollyanna that smiles all the time and just wants to have warm and cuddly things. It doesn't do that, and it doesn't make you a zombie either. Now, we have to make sure that we titrate the doses, and there can be some side effects, but they're pretty easily worked through. And they don't work the first time you take them. You know, it takes 2 to 4 weeks for the levels to build up enough in your body that those hormones and chemicals in your brain are changed enough so that you feel better. And people do think it's a weakness. And I'll tell you, I tell my patients, and I've never in my practice been a pill pusher. I prescribe medicine when I think it's necessary. And I tell them that, in my opinion, it's the most strong thing you can do, to admit it and seek help. It's not a weakness, it's a huge strength.
And you know, as they have spoken about situational anxiety and that's not the right term, but anxiety and depression, you know, that was 10 years ago. And then I did medication for a short amount of time, or not a short amount of time, but a period of time, went off of it, and then my marriage did end, and a pandemic happened, and I moved, and all those things, so I did do that again for a season, and now it's 10 years later, and, you know, despite my high blood pressure medication, you know, I'm not on medication, so just because you go on it at once, it doesn't mean you have to stay on it, but it is a viable treatment, and not one we should feel guilty about. I also, and this is controversial, but so is a pastor that cusses, so I'll just go on and be honest. You know, Johns Hopkins did that study with psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, but in a clinical form. And so they've been doing studies on the effects of psilocybin on depression, anxiety, PTSD, eating disorders, and stage 4 cancer diagnosis. And they decided to do that study with clergy because all these people were going through the study and that were agnostic or atheist. And they came out of that study talking about, they came out of their experience with psilocybin talking about the divine light and love and God, and they didn't even believe in God. So Hopkins wanted to do clergy. What I did not know was that my season, which I believe God clearly had a hand, not a literal hand, but an impact in this, because my experience was literally 2 weeks after my marriage ended and we separated. And I go back to saying that saved my life, because I would not have been able to have the strength. And all psilocybin does is help you go inward and heal the parts in you that sometimes years of talk therapy cannot do. And it is legal in some states now for medicinal purposes, so I don't feel like I'm some, like outlier. Darius Rucker, do y'all know who he is? Hootie and the Blowfish. He got arrested the other day for possession of psilocybin. I'd love to be able to interview him, but that's probably never going to happen. But, he had it in his possession. It's a powerful way to cope with stuff that we deal with. But I could not be a more devout follower of Jesus. I've loved Jesus since my mother played the organ and was the choir director at our Baptist church. And until the time that she died when I was 9, I was there every time the church doors were open. And I was baptized and, I loved Jesus. I still love Jesus. But I could not just pray all the stuff that was going on in my head that made me not want to get out of bed and made me think the world would be better if I were not in it. I couldn't pray that away. So will you surely talk about that? And I did not mean to talk about all this today, but it's real, and I think you respect me until I cuss in worship. And so I had to have some comedic relief. You respect me, or you wouldn't be coming here. And so you need to know that this stuff is real. And sometimes it looks all good, and it's not. And so being a loved one of somebody with anxiety or depression, your job as their partner, their spouse, their best friend, their parent, it matters. And so all this matters. But I was listening to a sermon from a pastor that I respect on anxiety, and his opening point was, you just need to pray about it. Now, the Apostle Paul says, cast all your anxieties on God, and in all things God will, hear your prayers. And it makes it sound like it's just this panacea, and that is not true. Surely you have been on staff at mega churches. I still have some envy that you guys were on staff where not that I envy the Kardashians, but Shirley and Dan were on staff at a mega church in LA where the Kardashians and Britney Spears and all those famous people go to church. So you have a deep concept of theology. Would you please speak to the Apostle Paul?
Yeah. Probably my deep concept of theology didn't happen there, but it was more.
I wondered, but I wasn't going to say that.
It was more like what you described, carried into church as infants, both Dan and I. But I will tell you, my freshman year of college, 100 years ago, I was in my Psych 101 class. And I raised my hand and told the professor, if we were living right, if we were right with God, we don't have depression or anxiety. So I still know him, and he's highly amused that I'm a therapist. And by the way, that was a year where I had a lot of suicidal ideation. I think going through therapy myself, some real pivotal time for me, and this was long before I was a therapist, I chose a Christian therapist because I wanted somebody who understood my worldview. Interestingly, we never talked about God. And the reason is because verses like, be anxious for nothing, but in everything give thanks. Is there truth to that? Of course there is. But if you are riddled with anxiety, that verse is shaming. That verse says, not only am I anxious, but obviously I'm not in a good relationship with God, or this wouldn't be happening.
Right.
And I can't will myself out of it. No, we can't pray our way out of it. If someone has cancer, we treat the cancer and we pray.
Well said.
Yeah, if somebody has diabetes, we would not think to say, if you would just really pray, you could give up that insulin.
Yeah.
That's a scary thing. There are people who actually think that.
And they are, but that's a whole different theological
Right.
ball of wax and not
Right.
one we deal with here. Here we believe that God empowers doctors and caregivers to help us discern the best treatment.
Right. I will tell you that same year as I was a freshman in college, and I really did not want to be alive. But I was mostly passive, like, could you just give me a disease? Could you just take me?
Wow.
Then I wouldn't be at fault. I wouldn't be doing this to my mom and dad. It would be different.
And that's why theology is so important and why we're so adamant that we don't compromise our theology here, because that happened because you had been guilted and shamed into believing that if you have these thoughts and feelings, then you're a burden to people around you. And folks with anxiety and depression, you're not a burden to those that are around you. You are not. They would not see you as a burden. And you're not a burden to God.
No, in fact, this was my lifesaver at that moment. I didn't have therapy available to me, or didn't even think of that, or medication. But I did discover Psalm 139. And I would sit by this pond on campus and just keep reading. You know me. You knitted me in my mother's womb. You know my thought afar off. And I took that and said, he knows what I'm thinking and why, and he cares. And that just became my lifeline to keep on taking the next step and the next step and the next step.
And that's it. That's all you have to do. It's just
Okay.
that next step and the next step. And you don't have to know what 10 years from now looks like.
We never showed that graphic. Would you like to
Yeah,
bring
let's
that
show
up?
that, and then we'll end with our closing song.
Okay. It might be kind of hard to see this.
We will send this out in the email tomorrow.
This is a graphic I got off of that really studious Scholastic instrument Facebook. I saw it on Facebook and it just hit me. If you notice in the top, this woman is cowering in the corner and her anxiety is like this big monster that's just hovering over her, and that's what it feels like. Well, she has enough courage to turn around and look at it, and it kind of shrinks. And then she takes a step toward it, and if you notice the shadow, it looks just like her. And she embraces it. That's how we deal with anxiety in a beneficial way. We look at what it is, and we embrace that that's part of who we are, and we do the questioning, the challenging, and the changing, the reframing. But I think that what it really becomes is, for those of us who have anxiety that is not just situational, but it lasts more, for those of us, that anxiety becomes sort of a little companion. There are good things about overthinking. It makes you do safer things. The opposite end of it is when it makes you so cautious that you're crippled. But when we embrace our anxiety or our depression as part of what we are, and we challenge it, and if necessary, we get the medication to help us deal with it more effectively, it becomes something that we can use to benefit ourselves and other people.
I love this last image. I have not looked at this closely. It is as if she is holding a newborn, which is symbolic of new life. And if we can go in and through those dark things, and knowing that the worst things are not the last things, then we give ourselves new light and new life, which ends in that ultimate, just that being at one with God, which we believe God is love and God is light. We all welcome and thank them for Luann and Shirley. Will you pray with me? Gracious God, you are the giver of light and life, and we are so grateful that you are who you are. Your greatness, your majesty, it holds us in and through our darkest times. Thank you for being that safe space for us. Thank you for not shaming us. God, if we are dealing with anxiety, may you remind us of who we are, and we are called by you and loved by you, and you whisper our name. If we are the loved one or supporter of someone dealing with anxiety, may we also have the discernment and the grace that we surround them with what they need. We offer ourselves to you with wholeness and with grace. Amen. I invite